Hey, I'm Tanya, your resident behavior analyst, and today we're going to talk about tantrums, specifically toddler tantrums. It can be important to understand why they're happening. Case in point, I have a story to tell. I once knew a parent who came to me and wanted help with their toddler. Their toddler was throwing a tantrum every time that she told him to clean up his toys. He was 3. So obviously he needed a little bit of help, but anytime she would say, okay, it's time to clean up, he would lose it. He would fall to the floor, there would be crying, there would be screaming, sometimes there would be throwing, and as a consequence, his mom was putting him in timeout. Now she came to me because it wasn't working. He continued to have tantrums every time she asked him to clean up, and over time they were actually getting worse. So I spoke to her and explained that she needed to understand the purpose behind his behavior, or what the motivation was behind his behavior. Same thing. Behavior analysts call it the function of behavior. And all that means is that you need to be able to understand what the child is trying to get by engaging in that behavior, so the tantrum, because that's going to tell you what it was that he was after. So in this instance specifically, when we really look deep into it, why is the kid having the tantrum, right? So her child was having tantrums because she was asking him to clean up. And then he would throw a tantrum, and then she would put him in timeout every single time. So we know that the trigger for this was being told to clean up. And we know that the consequence afterwards was being put in timeout. Now, you think that timeout is punishment, and you think that that's the correct form of discipline to administer for a tantrum. However, if you really think about it, if what he was looking for was to get out of cleaning up, he essentially got out of cleaning up because you put him in timeout. So he didn't have to clean up. Maybe he had to clean up later, but it did put it off. So he got what he wanted. So what she accidentally taught her child is that throwing a tantrum whenever he's told to clean up is a good way to put off having to clean up. Maybe it matters more to him not to have to clean up and control the situation than it is to go in timeout. Maybe timeout isn't a big deal to him. Some kids don't care. Just because it works for one kid doesn't mean it's going to work for another. So just because your friend used timeout with their kid doesn't mean it's going to work with yours. Just because it worked with one of your kids doesn't mean it's going to work with the other. I'm sure you know. They're very different. So keep that in mind when you're figuring out what consequences to give for certain behaviors. The reason this is important is because obviously if the kid is getting what they're trying to get, that makes sense. So like the kid was throwing the tantrum to get out of cleaning, and he was getting out of cleaning, then he's going to keep tantruming. That makes complete sense. If it's working for him, why change it? Especially if it's not hard for him. In behavior analysis terminology, that just means your child's behavior has now been reinforced. And what that means is it's more likely to happen in the future. That can happen for good behaviors too, but it also happens for not so great behaviors. So today I'm going to go over the 5 different motivators that people can have when they engage in any type of behavior. So the types of reasons or purposes that they have for engaging in behavior. That sounds complicated, but it's not. So let's get into it. The first one is attention. That's an easy one. We see people engage in behavior for attention all the time. Maybe you wave at someone. Maybe you say hi. Those are behaviors to get attention. Maybe you point to something to get someone to look at something. That's getting their attention to something. But then, of course, there's the other spectrum of behaviors. You get people screaming, specifically for us, toddlers. You get them whining, right? They'll ask a question over and over again. That's another form of getting your attention. So these are all examples of behaviors that are seeking attention. Now, the tricky thing about attention that a lot of people don't realize is that just because it's negative attention, so you scolding them, you looking at them with kind of, like a pointed look, like get it together, that kind of thing. Any type of acknowledgement that you notice what they're doing is a type of attention. And if that's what they were looking for, then you've just reinforce their behavior. What does reinforcement mean? It's more likely to happen in the future. So keep that in mind. It's important. It's very, very important. What's another one? We've all seen siblings, and you've got one who's got a finger maybe an inch away from the other going, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. That's an attention-seeking behavior. So what I've come to find over time is that usually most behaviors are for attention. Sometimes they have other purposes, which we'll talk about, but usually there's some kind of underlying attention that they're looking for most of the time. It's just the way it is with toddlers and people, really, adults, teenagers, good Lord, a lot. The next type of function of behavior is escape or avoidance of something. This one is specifically related to the example that I gave at the very beginning of the video. The child was engaging in tantrum behaviors in order to escape having to clean up. That's a pretty common one, or you just get them screaming no, or I'll do it later, or arguing with you, or trying to bargain with you. Other types of behaviors that are escape or avoidant, running away from you. Maybe they're at the park and you've told them it's time to get in the car and go, and they're like, no, they have better plans. So they run and they run and they run, and you have to run after them. But the entire time that they're running, they are escaping having to get in the car. They're putting it off. They're avoiding it. And so the longer it goes on, that behavior is reinforced, right? Because if the function of the behavior or the purpose of it is to avoid getting in the car, and running away puts it off, then they've effectively avoided it. So it's more likely to happen in the future. Don't worry, I'm going to cover how to go over these things and fix them in future videos, so don't panic. This video is just on how to recognize what it is, but then we'll go over what you should do instead, obviously. Other types of escape or avoidant behavior could be saying no. That can be appropriate or inappropriate depending on the situation, right? If you have a stranger asking you to get in their car and you say no, that's appropriate, and you're avoiding a dangerous situation, so that's always good. But, if you're asking your toddler to put his shoes on because it's time to go and he screams no at you, then not so appropriate. Another kind of normal behavior that has a function of escape or avoidance is using an umbrella. That's something you don't think about, but it's an example I use pretty often. You use an umbrella to avoid the rain, right? You've escaped it. So you're more likely to use an umbrella in the future, or a hoodie. Any of those work. Arguing can go under this category as well, because if your child argues with you about going to bed, then they're essentially putting off going to bed or even starting the process of it. Maybe they need to go brush their teeth, take a bath, those types of things. The longer they argue with you about it, the longer it takes them to get started. And if it serves that purpose for them and that's the purpose of their behavior, it's reinforced. They're going to keep doing it. Constant battle. A third purpose for behavior is access to things. That's a pretty easy one. One basic behavior that we all engage in when we want something is asking for it. Hey, can I have a glass of water? For toddlers, that can also be a behavior that they engage in to get something, right? Just asking for it. Another one could be asking for it repeatedly. We've had that. They can point to things that they need. They can drag you to them and push your hand toward them. That's another way that they can get something that they want. Another thing they can do is scream. Another thing they can do is cry. Another thing they can do is tantrum, which sometimes involves screaming and crying, if not usually. So anytime that a toddler engages in type of behavior, doesn't matter what kind, and then it's followed by them getting something, if that was why they were doing it, you've now fulfilled that purpose and you're going to reinforce that behavior. So it's going to keep happening, whether it's good or bad. I have definitely worked with parents who have kids that are nonverbal, and I completely understand when we first start working together how and why they've reached a point where their child is now tantruming very often, because I often find that the child has now learned that when they tantrum, their parents will offer them different things to see what it is that they want, because they know that they can't tell them what they want and they want to help them feel better or help them get what they need. So that's something that I work on often. If you are such a parent and are struggling with that, please reach out to me. I'd love to help. I can always create a video for it, a guide, anything. I'm more than happy to help. That's a big struggle, and it's usually fairly simple to fix. No worries. So I'd love to hear from you down below, or email me, whatever it is that you need help with. Besides that, it can happen with verbal children as well. Let's say that they're having a rough day or a rough time of the day. They've melted down. You saw it coming, but there was nothing you could do to stop it. It happens. And so your first instinct is your child is having a hard time. You need to just transition them to something else. And so the first thing you think of is, what is their favorite thing? Let me offer them this. This will get their attention. And so that's the best way to get them to stop tantruming or having a meltdown. And this can seem like a natural reaction, but if you think about it, if your child is throwing the tantrum because they do want something, that happens fairly often with toddlers, then you offering them their favorite thing is going to reinforce that tantrum if it's in the middle of the tantrum. If you wait until they calm down and then you wait a little while for them to, be calm, quiet, do something appropriate, like being calm and quiet, then you can offer it. But if you do it in the middle of the tantrum, you're teaching them that that's an effective way to get that thing, whatever it is. If it's Play-Doh or a favorite movie or a favorite snack, these are all going to reinforce that behavior, again, making it more likely to happen if that's what the child was looking for. It's kind of crazy how simply it can be reinforced without you even meaning to. Don't feel bad. It happens to all of us. I accidentally reinforce behaviors sometimes, and I do it for a living, so don't feel bad. A fourth purpose for behavior is called automatic or sensory. All that means is that you tend to do it without really thinking about it, and it has a bit of a sensory aspect of it. So this is people who drum their fingers on a tabletop. Girls or boys who curl their hair while they're, just sitting there in class, whatever it is. I can't do it, but there used to be kids in class who would, twirl their pencil. I'm not great at it. It's not for me. These are things that we do every day without thinking about them, and they're just automatically reinforcing. And what that means is that it's not something that is provided to us by somebody else. It's a feeling that we get just on our own by engaging in that behavior. And so related to toddlers, you see this sometimes. I work with children diagnosed with autism, and so you'll see them flap. Some of them do other types of behaviors. They'll do this with their hands. They like to look at things out of the corner of their eyes, things like that. And those are automatically reinforcing to them a lot of the time. And that's why they engage in that behavior. Doesn't hurt them, doesn't hurt anyone else. It's not a big deal. It's just a little quirk. No big deal. The reason I mention that is because it's a function of behavior. It's important to know about because you may see other people doing these things, and sometimes it's helpful to understand that it's, not a bad thing. It's not a weird thing. It's just a little quirky, and it's not anything that needs to be fixed or gotten rid of. I certainly never do when I work with these kids. If that's what makes them happy, then as long as it's not keeping them from doing the things that they need to do to talk to other people and live the best life that they can, then I encourage it. And then the last type of function of behavior, or a purpose for which behavior happens, is control. This is a fairly new one that we've started doing research on, and I've personally worked with kids where I can see that control is the purpose of the behavior, because at that point, it's not about getting something. It's more about they want control over the situation. They want you to do something a certain way for them. They want something said a certain way. They want their food to look a certain way. I'm sure you've come across that because that happens often. As a child, I hated the crust on the sandwich, and my grandma took it off every time. So that's a form of control. And so anytime you give in to that control, you're reinforcing the behavior. I'm sorry I have to keep saying that, but it's true. So those are the 5 functions or purposes for behavior. I hope that was helpful, if not at least enlightening or interesting. I'm sorry if I went on and on. Let me know in the comments down below if you have questions about any of them, if the video was too long. I never know how long to make these things. I know you're busy, so I try to keep it short, but sometimes it helps if there's a lot of examples, so I try to throw them in there. A parting note before I go is to keep in mind that whenever we engage in a behavior, we're not just doing it for one function at a time or one purpose at a time. Sometimes there's more than one, right? Maybe you're doing it to get access to something, but you're also doing it to get away from something. Or maybe you're doing it to get away from something or to get out of something, but also to get someone's attention. Keep that in mind because it can get a little complicated, but it's important to know because as you'll find out in the next video, when you're trying to figure out how to respond to that, what the consequence should be for those behaviors, you need to know why they're happening so you don't accidentally reinforce them. And if there's 2 of them at play, then you have to be a little extra careful. It's usually pretty easy, no worries, I'll go over it. Let me know if you have any specific questions below and I can answer them in the next video. If you've got specific behaviors your child's engaging in, love to hear about it. That's what I'm here for. Otherwise, please subscribe, sign up for notifications. I don't know why I did this. I meant this. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.